Good afternoon, Prof. Nina and friends. We are from Group 4, and today we will be talking about a case of reverse discrimination from failed diversity policy and unethical leadership in J. Walter Thompson. The flow of today's content, we will start from the summary of the case, followed by case analysis, which include of diversity policy failure, affirmative action, reverse discrimination, and unethical leadership, followed by recommendation, which consists of education and training program on biases, evaluating affirmative action, conducting pre-mortem exercise, and introducing 360-degree evaluations. And now let's move on to the summary of the case. Chess Bayfield and Dave Jenner were long-time male employees under JWT. With over 7 years of working history in the company, they were both part of the creative team, responsible for delivering creatives for campaigns as well as pitching to clients. Bayfield and Jenner were outstanding employees. Not only did they help clinch multiple clients throughout the course of their career, their work were also recognized by clients, such as clients include Ribena and HBC corporations, which are considerably high-profile clients. In 2017, despite having a poor fiscal position, JWT still awarded both Bayfield and Jenner a pay rise of 15% and promoted them to creative directors. The story began later that year. The company produced the 2018 budget and highlighted the need to make financial savings in 2018. A redundancy exercise was being engaged, and the two directors were included in the list, referencing that the pay for their salary were too high. Then, the gender pay gap report was produced and revealed that JWT had an alarming gender pay gap of 44.7%. Later on, to address the gender pay gap, Joe Wallace, as the Global Creative Director, and Lucas Peon, as the Executive Creative Director, were appointed to present a Creative Equals Conference. This conference was aimed at publicizing the gender pay gap figures and highlight diversity issues to fellow employees. However, the content of the presentation gained significant controversy by many employees. One of the presentation slides mentioned white British privileged straight man creating traditional above-the-line advertising needs to be obliterated. And then, the company engaged in a wrong redundancy exercise, and both Bayfield and Jenner were dismissed from there. And in February 2021, Bayfield and Jenner sued JWT for their dismissals in 2018.
For the case analysis, we will be analyzing certain issues. The failure of the diversity policy was caused by several issues, mainly the misuse of affirmative action that led to reverse gender and sexual discrimination, and also the unethical leadership of Joe Wallace and Lucas Peon. Going through the failure of the diversity policy first, the issue at hand will be the alarming gender pay gap of 44.7% in JWT, as mentioned earlier. JWT needed to produce solutions to tackle the gender pay gap issue and thus created policies and decisions that were supposedly aimed at increasing the representation of women. However, upon closer inspection, we realized that none of the action taken by JWT actually addressed the core issue at hand, which is to reduce the gender pay gap. Instead, some issues such as implicit biases and reverse discrimination were proliferated as actions were carried out under the diversity drive unobjectively. Let us discuss the first issue that contributed to the failure of the diversity policy, which is the misuse of affirmative action. For affirmative action, it refers to a set of rules designed to eliminate unlawful discrimination against the underrepresented workers. In JWT, the aim was to increase female representation. However, instead of hiring the best female candidates, the organization simply focused on hiring more women, despite some of them actually being underqualified. As a result of this affirmative action, it paradoxically led to reverse discrimination, where the male population ended up getting discriminated against. Touching on reverse discrimination, it refers to the unfair treatment of members that are part of the majority group in the workplace. Jo Wallace, the Global Creative Director, she identified herself as a gay woman. So she treated members of the LGBT and women as part of her in-group and straight men as an out-group. As a result, she ended up reverse discriminating against straight males in the organization, calling them privileged individuals. There are two types of reverse discrimination present, namely reverse gender discrimination and reverse sexual discrimination. To elaborate more on reverse gender discrimination, Wallace already pre-decided that Bayfield and Jenner were to be added into the redundancy list without leveraging on the scoring system that is normally used to rank employees. More importantly, she secretly requested for one senior executive to be taken off the pool of redundancies just because she is a woman. Decisions were being made solely based on gender, whereby the minority female population is favored over the dominant male population. This is a clear case of reverse gender discrimination. The second type of reverse discrimination present was reverse sexual discrimination. When dealing with the issue of gender pay gap, Wallace considered the sexual orientation of the male workers when making decisions, making sure to label them as straight males. In this case, sexuality should not have been affected at all. Minority homosexual population is favored over the dominant heterosexual population, which clearly indicates the presence of reverse sexual discrimination.
For the last analysis, it will be looking into the unethical and ineffective leadership that was being showcased in the case. Although both Wallace and Peons are higher ups, they weren't able to lead effectively, and this is noted from the abuse of power, especially seen by Wallace, which allows them to manipulate organizational resources to their advantages. Wallace in particular had poor leadership style. She was a highly autocratic leader. In addition, she displayed some degree of psychopathy. She was quick to terminate valuable members, including Bayfoot and Jenner. Zooming into abuse of power, we have to understand that both Wallace and Peon possess legitimate power. This is based off their appointed positions as Global Creative Director and Executive Creative Director, respectively. In addition, they were given access to organizational resources to spearhead the movement of shaking off the company's reputation of a boys' club. As such, this enabled them to abuse their power to work in their favor of removing straight white men from the organization. Wallace was a particularly ineffective leader as well. She led with an autocratic leadership style, not considering the opinions of others in her decision-making process. Bayfield and Jenner actually expressed their concerns regarding the comments made by Wallace at the conference, which ultimately resulted in their dismissals. This leadership style of Wallace may be a result of her possessing some degree of psychopathy due to her indifference in terminating two of her well-performing employees simply because of in-group favoritism and personal biases. Moving on to recommendations, our group has identified 4 key recommendations. First of all, for JWT to introduce an education and training program on biases. The overarching goal of this program is to educate and train employees to work towards eliminating biases, especially in important decision-making process. In the education component, employees are being taught on implicit biasness and the negative consequences associated with it. Firstly, employees need to be aware of the type of implicit biasness that they harbor, such as gender, race. This will be measured through implicit association tests. Employees are to be taught about the detrimental outcomes as well, especially towards themselves. This helps to raise concerns and motivate them towards eliminating such biases within themselves. In the training components, employees are being trained on how to apply a variety of bias reduction strategies in their daily lives. Some of these strategies include counter-stereotypic imaging, whereby employees are trained to think of examples or situations whereby they go against stereotypes, as well as individuation, whereby employees are trained to prevent drawing inferences from the group that the individual is being associated with. This is done by obtaining specific information about the individual. Ultimately, through this program, employees will experience heightened awareness of biases themselves, motivating them to self-regulate and work towards reducing implicit biases. However, employees themselves may not be receptive towards this program, especially if it is a one-off session. This will definitely limit the effectiveness of the education and training program. As such, the program should be carried out multiple times to ensure the bias reduction strategies are carried out on a habitual level. Key leaders should be the one walking the talk as well. They need to be seen actively working towards improving themselves to show that the organization as a whole sincerely emphasizes on making the workplace fairer for all.
Organizations should properly evaluate their affirmative action plans. When carried out properly, affirmative action programs can actually equalize employment rates and wage levels between men and women, as shown by research studies. On the flip side, when affirmative action is not done properly, this leads to the risk of reverse discrimination. In some cases, may even be seen as an act of tokenism. This would severely undermine the purpose of affirmative action, as historically, dominant groups would feel that they received unfair treatment in order to pursue the well-being of an underrepresented group. In worst cases, it will lead to lower workplace efficiency when underqualified individuals are hired to fulfill the affirmative action plans. Therefore, there is a need to properly evaluate affirmative action plans, and this can be done by carrying out an underutilization analysis. An underutilization analysis will allow organizations to identify areas in the workforce that have an underutilization of a target minority group. Once identified, organizations can then analyze why these minority groups are underrepresented and uncover discrepancies between their current share in the organization's workforce and the available workforce. This allows organizations to take a deeper look into the underutilization of certain groups, such as women, and look at hidden barriers to advancement, and encourage them to take active steps in hiring more qualified candidates for the job. This will also prevent risk of reverse discrimination, as employees and prospective candidates are promoted and hired objectively based on their qualifications. If JWT had properly evaluated their affirmative action plans, it would not have resulted in the backlash by the white male population, as there would be no basis to argue against the hiring of more women into the company. After evaluating affirmative action plans, organizations then need to conduct pre-mortem exercises for the actions and policies they want to undertake. A pre-mortem should be conducted before an organization makes any major decisions. This can be done by imagining that a project has failed and working backwards to find out what could have potentially led to the failure. This will allow the decision-making team to reflect on all the possible unfavorable outcomes before they actually happen, in order to prevent themselves from making the same mistakes when actually embarking on the project. Studies have shown that prospective hindsight allows teams to better predict future outcomes by up to 30%. If Wallace and Peon had considered the detrimental effects of their actions, they would have foreseen that their implicit biases would have clouded their judgment, leading to the employment of questionable tactics and actions. They would have thus avoided the eventual backlash and the lawsuits. However, performing repeated in-depth analysis into how a project might fail may place a huge drain on an organization resources and delay action. Employees may be reluctant to go through this process, as most organizations would have already had a list of risk and mitigation factors before deciding to take on the project. It can also be argued that it's a waste of time to keep thinking of failures if they do not actually happen in the end. If an organization were to keep harping on how a project might fail, the project might never start, especially if there's an extremely risk-averse team member. Therefore, it's important that pre-mortem is only conducted for major organizational decisions with foreseeable and high probability failures in order to not waste time and resources. Lastly, organizations should increase transparency and objectivity in evaluating employee performances by implementing 360 evaluations. To reduce the gender pay gap issue, women need to be rated fairly in the workplace and be given equal opportunities as their counterparts. Traditionally, the task of evaluating employees has fallen onto managers, as they're the ones held responsible for the performance of employees. However, with many organizations adopting the practice of self-managed teams and introducing virtuality into the workplace, immediate supervisors may be distanced from the employees and may be unreliable when judging an employee's performance. As such, 360-degree evaluation will allow employees to be evaluated by co-workers that are in their immediate circle of contact. This allows employees to receive feedback from those that are familiar with their work style and thus provides a more accurate review of employee performance. In the context of JWT, there may be a perception that women are inferior due to the male-dominated culture of the workplace, and superiors would be biased when making decisions. If JWT adopts a 360 evaluation, it could benefit women, as they will be evaluated more fairly and get more encouraging feedback. This allows women to recognize their self-worth and be encouraged to climb the corporate ladder, which will increase the median pay of women and thus reduce the gender pay gap issue in JWT. Some of the limitations revolving around 360-degree evaluation includes determining the right mix of employees and subordinates. When peers are added into the mix, there's a higher chance of artificially inflating positive feedback, as peers tend to be more lenient compared to subordinates. In addition, subordinates may still rate extremely negatively due to individual biases, which reduces the effectiveness of the 360-degree evaluation. Another limitation of this is the willingness of females for professional advancement. Women themselves place less importance on power-related goals, as they associate more negative outcomes with higher power, perceive power as less desirable, and are less likely to take advantage of opportunities for professional advancements. However, we believe that this is still a much fairer form of evaluation, as the industry itself is very fast-paced and dynamic. For subordinates like Peon, who had little interaction with lower-level employees, they may not be fully aware of the depth of work that is being completed. Hence, 360-degree evaluations help to reduce the event of unfair promotion or dismissal, and combined with education and training programs to read implicit biases in decision-making. This will generally result in fairer evaluation of women in the workplace, thus giving them equal opportunities as men. With that, we have come to the end of our presentation and hope that this unusual case of reverse discrimination has allowed you to think deeply into how diversity policies may not always be as good as they sound, especially when they are not being carried out properly. Thank you.